Hello.
Bye-bye.
Oh, cute baby voices. Love that.
Sorry.
We're going to get ready to get, that's quite all right. I love hearing baby sounds. Animal sounds are my favorite too. It's okay. This is the world we live in now. So we'll give it a few more minutes. Folks are still entering the room. We do have a very large number of registrants.
Can you hear it?
So, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, you won't let me in. They have to let you in.
So we have a really large number of registrants. So what we're going to do is ask that everyone mute themselves.
What does it say?
So
Launch meeting, and I click on that and nothing happens.
Oh, let me
Hi,
done
Amy.
with that.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Having technical.
I'm excited. I recognize some names from my previous world, so that makes me very happy. We do have about 86 participants that are going to be joining us today. So what I am going to ask is that everybody place themselves on mute. We will have opportunities for questions at the end, but if you do have questions as we go, please feel free to use the chat option. I will be monitoring that throughout the presentations and the discussion. So we'll go ahead and get started here in just a few minutes. Okay, we're at 3 after. So, hi, my name is Sarah Smith. I'm the Provider Relations Supervisor for Yamhill CCO. Thanks for joining our forum today. We are going to be talking about our prior authorization grid and our authorization review process. The main presenter is going to be Deanne Carr. She is our Behavioral Health Director. So, Deanne, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Unmute myself to start with. Good afternoon, Deanne Carr, and I'm Behavioral Health and Integration Director.
No.
Oh, good. But I can take this off with the doors closed.
You can.
We might want to mute ourselves. I think we're privy to a assortment of conversations there. But then, it's lunchtime, so a little extra excitement there. I just really want to welcome everyone today and appreciate you taking your time during your lunch hour to talk about the riveting, topic that is prior authorization. So hopefully we can share a little information and answer your questions and make this worth your time.
And to help answer questions as we move through this presentation in this forum, we do have Courtney from our plan partner PH Tech. She can help with some of those technical questions around SIM and the PA grid. So Courtney, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Courtney Finley. I'm the account manager for YCCO with PH Tech and have been with PH Tech for a number of years. And I'm happy to help answer any questions navigating through SIM or any other processes as needed. Thank you.
And then we also have Dustin from our Plan Health Partners. I'm not sure if he's on yet, but he will also be available to help with any questions that we have as we move along. So I really appreciate everyone joining. And I'm going to go ahead and hand over my screen to Deanne so she can bring up her presentation.
Oh, there we go. Okay. See if I can click the right buttons. Okay, and share. Okay, so this morning this afternoon, I'm losing track of time. We're going to be talking about prior authorization process, and apparently my computer's deciding to be a little slow this afternoon, but really just wanting to touch base on what's new, how it's going to work, and maybe talk a little bit just briefly about the way that it was and our efforts to streamline. So, how it was. Historically, there has been a lot of single case agreements used, and part of single case agreements involved submitting documentation as part of the authorization process. And as we've moved forward with this process and transition, we've really looked at how we might maximize the use of contracts more extensively. And one of the benefits of that really brings with it, for standard outpatient services, it gives providers a more streamlined process where they can go into SIM and enter, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, auto auths, and there's less documentation to provide. So we're hoping that that feels beneficial and supportive as we get this process up and going. So beginning January 1st, there is an increased number of providers who have a direct YCCO contract or in the process of getting contracted with. Now, I know there's been a little bit of confusion here and there, so I'll just kind of mention that as part of the transition, we've contracted with PH Tech and Providence Plan Partners to help carry out certain administrative functions for us. And contracting is one of those functions. And so there may be times that you've received an email from someone with a Providence or a PH Tech email, and it might have been a little confusing about, am I contracting with Providence or not? And to just sort of clear that up, that they are working on behalf of the CCO. So your contract is with YCCO. Now, some of you had a contract with Providence for commercial lines of business, and you may have received an amendment. That amendment then connects you to YCCO. So trying to be as streamlined as possible. So as we begin to look at, more people contracted, obviously there's more providers who can use the auto auth process in SIM. And, I think that this is helpful. And just to clarify the why of it is, in order to help with claims payment, certain information needs to be in the SIM system. Who are you? Who's the member? What's going on? Et cetera, so that there's enough information that the claims payment process moves more smoothly. And I know that we've had some forums on, your new best friend, SIM, and how to use that. But if you have any other questions about that, obviously, you can reach out for additional information. Non-contracted providers or providers that are delivering services found on the prior authorization list still need to submit authorization requests. And so just to clarify that difference. So when we start to talk about prior authorizations, I find it helpful to maybe clarify a little bit of language. There's a lot of lingo used. I know that, over the years, I just always referred to things as prior authorizations and then got confused when people started talking to me about medical necessity reviews. So I thought I'd touch base on that with folks today. So the utilization management team conducts a medical necessity review in response to a prior authorization request. So it really is, it's that function that they engage in to ensure that the services being requested do indeed meet medical necessity, that the documentation supports that. It's always good to kind of have the disclaimer that does a prior authorization guarantee payment? No, because the medical necessity review establishes whether the medical necessity is there. But it's not going to address things like there's times where a member's eligibility shifts and nobody knows why. They shift to another CCO, they drop off OHP, things like that. That can create some complications. Also, as a provider, did you submit the claim correctly? Did you dot your I's, cross your T's in that? So there's those pieces of it, and we just sort of need to acknowledge that that can come into play. Now, if you receive a denial or a claim doesn't process effectively, then there's an opportunity to reach out, whether it be to provider relations, customer service, to say, hey, I've got a problem with this claim. Can you walk me through what's going on? And sometimes it can be resolved, and sometimes it is something like an eligibility issue, which we can't change that. So just kind of want to talk a little bit about what are the things that create challenges for prior authorization. Kind of good to call those out. They need to be submitted in a timely fashion. Somebody, let's say, enters the hospital. The hospital needs to be submitting that prior auth request within that 24-hour period to get that in there, to get those conversations happening. One of the big hiccups I think that people run into is the documentation. It's either incomplete, it's overly vague, or it's unreadable. I've certainly seen some, we'll just pick on the doctors today, seen some handwritten doctor's notes that were a bit like a Rorschach test. So we weren't quite sure what it said, but it was sort of interesting to look at. So really want to make sure a reviewer can't determine medical necessity if they can't read what got sent to them. And there's times where maybe there were some things that weren't sent and there might be a request for, hey, we need you to send us this or that. And if that doesn't get provided back in a timely fashion, then it's not able to be included in the determination. And the timeliness is important because the utilization management department has to operate in compliance with the organ administrative rules. And there's very clear rules that say you need to process this type of claim within this number of days. And so the clock is ticking for them and they need to make certain determinations in a timely fashion. So when there is perhaps a request to you for that additional information, it's really important to get that right back to them. Another thing that pops up sometimes is that the requested service does not pair with the diagnosis. So there's this big, long prioritized list that OHA puts out. It's generally better to Google prioritized list behavioral health to try to find the sort of streamlined version that only lists the behavioral health diagnoses. That's a little easier to use and you're not wading through about 2,000 medical conditions. So now to get to the point of why you all called in today. So what needs prior auth? The short answer that at the bottom of that slide is inpatient services, subacute, residential detox, your day treatments, your partial hospitalization programs, intensive outpatient, ECT, TMS, IIBHT, psych and neuropsych evaluations, and ABA. Now there is, over time, things may change and evolve as new rules come out from the state, new programs start. So it's important that we have an up-to-date list. And so on the YCCO website, oh, come now, don't give me attitude. Oh, it helps to hit the right button. So there is a link on the website. It takes you to, there we go, and it even worked. So it'll take you to the prior authorization. Let me get this large enough so hopefully people can read it. An important thing to think about is as we begin to look at this, we really want to say, okay, we've got inpatient, we've got alternatives to inpatient, sort of some of these categories, specialty outpatient, and then just sort of some program specific or specific diagnostic codes. Sometimes, we get a question about, well, does, 90 867 require, I'm probably pulling from the wrong area. Okay, so does H0031 require a prior auth? Well, this is where you start to get into questions that aren't about the codes, but about the programs. So there are some programs where you would need to submit a prior auth for the program, but some of the codes that you can encounter within that program could work for standard outpatient and also could work for that. So you want to be careful about always anchoring to a billing code, because as you look here, there's a whole lot of codes here that show up both in standard outpatient as well as the IIBHT program. Now, so this right here is where we begin to look at, yes, these need prior authorized. These are the mental health ones. We get into substance use. We've broken it down by the ASAM levels to try to be a little more straightforward in, does this need prior auth? Does it not? And again, we're into it's similar to mental health, which is it inpatient, facility-based, residential, detox, or an alternative to inpatient, such as PHP or IOP? Those are going to need to be prior authorized. Now we sort of scroll down here, and this is where we begin to differentiate. So when it says no medical necessity review, it's for in-network providers. So it becomes a question of, do you have a contract? Now that's not the same as a single case agreement. As a single case agreement, you would need to go through the prior auth process. If you are in network and have a current contract with YCCO, this is where you begin to enter those auto auths within SIM. And as you can see, there's a lot of codes associated with, whether it's wraparound, different levels of care. So within the YCCO system, we look at sort of a level A through D levels for outpatient, and that's really a means of communication to really look at the acuity and severity of the individual presenting for services. And so someone at level A is going to have a more mild, less volatile presentation, whereas someone at level D would be high risk for hospitalization or other adverse outcomes if there's not adequate services wrapped around them. And then, just looking across here, and again, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but just to let you know where it's at and gives you a sense of what you can enter auto authorizations for, broken again down by mental health and SUD services. Now, one thing I will note is, let's say, here's something, mental health outpatient, and it's a sort of community treatment. That doesn't mean that just anyone can bill a sort of community treatment or run on a sort of community treatment program. You still need to meet the organ administrative rules for certain outpatient programs, such as ACT and ESA and wraparound, IOSS, et cetera. So just making sure that you are operating within your licensure and any certificate of approval that you have with the state. I'm gonna pop back to, okay. One more slide and then we'll move to some questions and or the next part of our presentation. As mentioned, contracted providers can enter the auto authorizations. So you'll really want to make sure that you know all the ins and outs of how to enter the auto auths and how to get them in a timely fashion so that any claims you submit are processed smoothly. So we certainly want to make sure that things are as smooth as possible and as clear as possible for you. All right, questions? Or Sarah, did you want to do the next part and then questions?
We do have a question in the chat, so let me get there really quick. Angie is wondering if YCCO considers outpatient DBT, dialectal behavior therapy, to be a specialty outpatient, meaning always need to obtain an auth for assessment and treatment?
Well, if you are a contracted provider for those services, then no, you would not need to. Now, for outpatient services, if you are providing DBT via more of an IOP or intensive outpatient program, and DBT is simply the clinical foundation to the IOP program, then you would need to get a prior authorization for the IOP. So it's a yes and kind of, or no and kind of answer.
Does that answer your question, Angie?
Or did I just confuse you? Yeah, so, okay, Portland DBT, that's yes. So for your straight outpatient, it's an auto-auth. For your IOP, then it becomes submitting the prior auth request.
Yeah, so you would still put an authorization in, it's just whether or not it would need to be reviewed. So some of those
Yeah.
would auto approve and then others would have to go through medical necessity review.
Looks like Brenda, for acute inpatient, let's see, oh, inpatient acute care, yes, that requires prior authorization. So anything where you're getting up into that facility-based and different iterations of inpatient, whether it be psychiatric inpatient, subacute inpatient, residential, et cetera.